Welcome to Thursdays with Troy. As always, I'm Troy Lambert, mystery author, editor, and super plotterer, and your host. Today, I'm excited to welcome Lance Charnes. Is that how I say your last name?
Carnes.
Carnes. And Lance has an amazing career with a few twists and turns. After active duty service in the U.S. Air Force, during which time he worked at the White House, he supervised the information technology department for the construction manager of the Los Angeles subway. And then instead of succumbing to the usual outlets for a midlife crisis, sports cars and cheerleaders, he studied art history and set design and became a game artist for Activision and 3DO. Then following the terrorist attacks of September of 2001, he decided it was time to get a real job. Having received training in emergency management through the Air Force, he entered the field as a civilian, working for the Contra Costa County in California, Office of Emergency Services, then moved to similar functions for the University of California at Riverside, Sprint and Ericsson, and now the City of Buena Park. He's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserves. In his last few years, he served as an intelligence officer. He has degrees in computer science from UC Berkeley and an emergency service administration from California State University at Long Beach. He's also been diving since 1999 and holds advanced open water rescue diver and EAN certifications. He's been intrigued by shipwrecks and maritime archaeology since growing up watching Jacques Cousteau. Absolutely love that. And Sea Hunt National Geographic specials on TV. In 2006, he studied maritime archaeology with the Aegean Institute in Greece. And he travels extensively with his wife and incorporates his experiences and impressions into his novels. What an amazing career and an amazing resume. He also has a large cat who contributes to his writing through a passionate love of fish. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the ADHD career. I couldn't stick with something for so long.
The ADHD career that many authors seem to have. And it is too bad that your cat could not join us on this show. But today, so we're going to talk about a couple of different things. So because Lance also has an amazing background, he also has a really cool way of blending a couple of different templates to use Plotter to outline his novel. So action adventure is not just a genre of its own either. It's also a subgenre for a lot of other genres like sci-fi, romance, and more. So even if you just want to add some action adventure to your books, this is going to be a good template and a good thing for you to look at no matter what your genre. There's some things you definitely need to get right. And there's a couple different ways that Lance is doing this that are really interesting by blending Save the Cat and some 3-act structure. So we're going to talk about that. But first of all, so military guys, I was in the military too, they tend to like structure. Are you a major architect, detailed plotter, or how much detail do you put into your plotter files?
Into the plotter files, not a whole lot. I do outline. I have to do that with the kind of stuff that I write. I really can't shotgun it, especially with the thrillers. I have to typically have a bunch of people coming from different directions to all end up in one place at one particular time. And you don't want to try to do that right off the cuff. And so I've done a lot of different outlining processes since I've been writing seriously, and always managed to make it work, but some of them were more problems than they were worth. So when Plotter came along, I looked at that and I said, well, that could work too. So I got that. And the way that I learned to do it was by outlining my current work in progress, which is right now in beta read, is called Engaño, which is Spanish for deception. What you've got right now, the file that I sent you, is what I ended up with by about halfway through the writing of one thing that I did do kind of in preparation for this was I took the new ability to change the color of the scene cards
Excellent. Well, okay, so we're going to look at that. The first thing we're going to look at is, so we've got a couple different structures here. The first one we've got is the sequence structure. So let's talk about that, about the 3-act kind of sequence structure and how that plays into your process.
Okay. Alexandra Sokolov, who was a screenwriter, also did this thing for screenwriting for authors. And she was promoting the 3-act 8-sequence model, because that's what they use in screenwriting, and it's a pretty universal way of ordering a story. And so what it is you got, typical 3 acts. Act 1 gets everything set up. That's the inciting incident and what gets the hero going. It takes 2 sequences to do that. Then Act 2 has 4 sequences in it. It's typical now to split it up into Act 2A and Act 2B. Sequence 3 and 4 start throwing in the obstacles for the hero, raise the stakes, and then at the midpoint, something significant happens to our hero and changes the course of his or her action through the rest of the book. Then Act 2B, those next 2 sequences start ratcheting up more tension, and at the end of sequence 6, you have the setup for the climax, essentially. And then Act 3 is resolving everything that's going on. If you've got any twists at the end, you get those done by sequence 7, and sequence 8 is the cleanup and the resolution. And if you look at this and you keep that in mind and look at pretty much any genre story, that's the structure for it. And it doesn't matter whether it's, romance or mystery or, historical, whatever. They all kind of tend to fall in that because we see this structure all the time. When we watch TV, when we go to the movies, when we read a book, this is the way that it's set up. And it's pretty fundamental. So I've been using that ever since I've been writing seriously. And so that's good as far as it goes, but then you need something else in order to be able to order the main story beats. But if you're writing any kind of genre fiction, which relies on the plot, Save the Cat works pretty well. It works especially well for action. It fits really well for that. Strangely enough, it fits really well for romantic comedy too.
Yes, yes, it does, because a lot of things happen there. Yes. And it is interesting how these 2 sequences line up, and basically Save the Cat just divides it into more parts. Right. So let's talk about that, because we have the sequence 1, which in the sequence structure is just the status quo and the inciting incident. But we have more cards in Save the Cat that break that sequence into basically smaller chunks. Does that help you plan your beats a little better to ensure your timing is correct? Or how do you use that in Plotter?
Well, there's 15 standard story beats in the Save the Cat framework. And so having the finer, granularity in that lets me know that there's certain things I have to accomplish in each sequence. So anyway, the first thing in Save the Cat is the opening image, and that's what the first thing that you see your hero doing, and that's the hero in his or her normal world. So I knew I had to have an opening image. I knew I had to set up Carson in her normal world, and so that's the next card down. Then after I've established what her normal world is, there needs to be a catalyst, something that kicks her in the butt to go off and do what she's going to have to do for this story. And then you also need a theme. And the way that Save the Cat is set up is there's 2 different things that's going on. The A story is the plot. So that's the stuff that gets done that leads to whatever the concrete ending and the resolution of the story is. The B story is the emotional or psychological thing that the hero does to become more fulfilled or a better person or whatever at the end. And at the end, it pays off because she's in a very different place by the end than she was where she started off. And that's the B story.
Right. It usually does. More of the character arc. The B story is more of the character arc. The A story is more what actually happens.
Right.
So tell us about, so in these, obviously I see you're using colors for some of the scene cards. So tell us how you use those to keep some things straight. It looks like that's kind of a B story.
Well, what it is, what it was doing, and I started off with the B story. I started off trying to do a subplot separately, and it was, I'll probably try this again, but it wasn't working so well for me this first time around because I was having trouble keeping the scenes in the B story lined up in the right places with where they happened in the middle of the A story. And so I eventually ended up just including those in the whole A story. What the colors I used for this were is that in the telling of the story, I go back and forth between Carson and what she's doing and the bad guys and what they're doing. And there's two different branches of the bad guys. And so one of them is the gold and one of them is the blue. And what I was trying to do is figure out if I had enough of the bad guys in the right places in order to be able to keep their side of the story going. And this made it really stand out. I found before I got the ability to color blocks that I was losing them in the forest. And this way I can now look at it and see, okay, there's a whole slew of them doing whatever, over in this place. Maybe I need to break it up some more.
Yes. And this is, and actually this is really interesting to see that visually, it just helps you track your B story. And it's just another way. There's several different ways you can do this, but this is just one of them. Right. So now let's talk about more about like how the midpoints of the sequence and the Save the Cat line up, and how these things just help you when you're writing an action adventure. How do they help you keep like right on track and making sure everything's happening that needs to happen?
Okay. Well, I know that let's talk about the midpoint, for instance. The midpoint has to be a really significant event that happens that just changes the game for the hero. And it can be in a really good way, or usually it's a really bad way. Especially in like action thrillers, it changes things not for the better. And that's what happens here. So if you scroll down to see what I've got down here. So I knew I needed to have this midpoint shift, and that was at the end of sequence 4. It's supposed to hit right at pretty much the middle of the story. The scene cards that I have in here don't necessarily correspond to a chapter.
Right.
There's specific things that need to happen. In some cases, the scene card is 2 or 3 chapters. In some cases, there may be 2 or 3 scene cards in a single chapter, but I know that I had to hit those marks in order to be able to make it through each of the Save the Cat story beats and still have a comprehensible story.
Right. So that's one thing we like to emphasize is that a beat is not a chapter.
Yes.
And a chapter is not a scene, and a scene is not a chapter. Those things can all be different.
Yes, exactly. And I like that in Plotter, I didn't have to make, a scene card for every chapter. I only needed to do what the scenes were or what the particular piece of action was. and then I could figure it out while I was writing. I could think of it in terms of a story as opposed to as a collection of chapters, and that was liberating.
Yes, very flexible. That's one of the things that Plottr does really well, is it allows you to organize things in a way that works for you. You don't have to use chapters. You can use beats. You can use scenes, whatever. So let's talk about some other parts of Plottr, because obviously in a thriller and an action adventure type thing, you typically have a large cast of characters, even if they're minor characters. So let's click over to characters and talk about how you handle characters in your manuscript. Do you have... Obviously, you have certain ways of them divided by Project Karma and some of these other things. So tell us about that and how you do this.
Okay. Well, I needed to put in character cards for these folks in order to be able to plug them into the scene cards, so I could kind of keep track of who the major players were for each of the scenes. Some of these I have, for instance, for Carson, and she's my heroine in this. That's all there is for Carson, because I have like a 10-page outline biography for her in the Story Bible, because she's a recurring character not only in this series, but she also showed up in the first 2 books in my other series, which is the Duet Agency Files. So this is all I had in there because I already got all the stuff for her. Now, where I probably would have ended up putting more information in, and will for the next one, is for the ancillary characters who show up just for that book. So for instance, in this case, the Project Karma and the Sabadell group and Zapodneft and so forth, I would probably put more information in there for them. And then one of the things I did for places that was useful, there we go, is that I put in links, if I had them, to particular, websites, or in some cases I've got links to Google Maps for where these places are. So it's okay, so
GPS coordinates.
I've got geo coordinates, and so all I had to do is just copy that and drop it into Google Maps. I started late on actually putting links in for that kind of thing.
Right. That's an extremely valuable way. An interesting way to do that is links, which we've known about, but geo coordinates is a great idea.
Yeah. And all the places that I use in pretty much all my stories are real places.
Gotcha.
So my characters stay in real hotels, they eat in real restaurants, unless they have to shoot up the place. And so I can actually go to real, links on the map or the websites for places. And
excellent. Well, that is fantastic. I think you've given us a great view of a lot of the things you do with Plottr, with characters and places, with blending a couple of interesting basically timeline types and templates to create something that's your own. So really great job with this type of stuff. And I think it's a fantastic takeaway for people as far as what to do with an action adventure when you've got that large cast of characters. But so to wrap things up though, let's talk about some other things. So what other resources have helped you get where you are today as a writer? Obviously we know Plottr, but what other resources would you recommend to people who are maybe just starting out with action adventure or those type of things and want to get better at it?
Well, I would say if they're not familiar with the 3-act 8-sequence model, Alex Sokoloff has a couple of workbooks that she sells. You can go look them up on her website and get a good grounding in that, because that's just basic story structure. There's a lot of good information on the Save the Cat website. So if you don't have the book, you should probably still get the book. But if you don't have it, you can get a lot of information. There's beat sheets for a lot of TV, movies and books, so you can see how the different story types that they talk about work in real stories. Carson is a dude with a problem, which is one of the 10 story types that Blake Snyder defined in there. There's a number of other models out there, and a lot of it just depends on how technical you want to get, how much analysis you want to do. I played with StoryGrid for a while. It's very dense. I had a hard time connecting with it. Author friend of mine swears by it, and it does all these amazing spreadsheets and things like that. And I looked at it and said, that's like work. There's other ways that I can get there, but read a lot, and don't look down on watching TV shows and movies, because they have to have really strong structures in order to be able to get their business done by the end of the hour, by the end of the 2 hours, or by the end of the 6th episode, or whatever it is that their format is. So they have to be really disciplined about their story structure, which means it's actually pretty easy to break down their story structures and see how they did it.
Yeah, but it never does hurt. That's great advice, because it never does hurt to tear apart someone else's story, or one of your own, frankly, to see what the structure actually looks like. And that's fantastic advice. And those are great resources. I would highly recommend the Save the Cat book. Save the Cat Writes the Novel is also absolutely excellent. We talked about that last week. Actually, I kind of went through that on the show. So that's something for you guys to look at. I obviously definitely recommend that you buy the book, but there are tons of resources about this stuff online. And Save the Cat is a fantastic template. Combine it with the 8 sequences, and you've really got something there.
Something that doesn't seem to get a whole lot of love, but was actually really useful for me, is the outline function on Plotter. And I was able to use that to export my Plotter timeline here into a document that, if I'm working on my laptop without my great big screen attached to it, I can still get all the information that I needed in order to keep my thoughts going, but I didn't have to try to struggle along on the small screen with 4 blocks that I can see at a time. But also, it ends up working as a really good basis for a synopsis. So if you have to write a synopsis for your book, for instance, if you're shopping it around to agents, you could do worse than start with whatever you get out of the outline part of Plotter, and then turn it into a real narrative. But you've already got all of your story beats in there. You've already got all of your scenes, and they're in the right order. So you just export it to Word and pretty it up, and you've got a good first chop, add a long synopsis.
Oh, that is excellent. That is an excellent use of the Word export, of the export to Microsoft Word. That's a brilliant use of that. It really does set you up for success with that type of thing. Okay, so final things. Where can people learn more about you, your books? Where can they find you online? How can they stalk you? All those different things.
Okay. My main online presence is at my website, which is wombatgroup.com. Wombat like the marsupial, group like the group, .com. It's got information about all my books. And then it's also got links to the rest of my social media. I have a Facebook author page, which is lance.carnes.author, if I remember correctly.
Well, as you know, we always have a question of the day on Thursdays with Troy, because we're searching out writers to find out the answers to all the great questions that the world has to ask. And of course, we're the best people to determine those things. So because you're an extremely well-traveled guy, you travel with your wife all over the place and things like that, I just want to ask you the age-old question: mountains versus the beach. You have a choice. Which one do you take?
Well, when I'm going diving, it's a pretty simple choice. actually there is diving in the mountains, but it tends to be quarries, and you get about 2 feet visibility, and it's cold. So definitely the beach.
Definitely the beach. Fantastic. Should have known that a diver would, of course, answer that way.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Thanks for settling that question for us. Everybody head to the beach. If it's as hot where you are as it is where I am, that's definitely a good choice. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining us on Thursdays with Troy. We hope you enjoyed yourself and that you learned a lot. As always, the Facebook group is a great place to ask questions. If you have them, you can always tag me in the group. If you think Lance has an answer to the question you're asking, you can tag whoever you think might have the answer you're looking for. And with that, we'll see you next Thursday for another Thursdays with Troy. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you.